is that uthi ubaba nangu lo muntu uNkulunkulu ekudala emlindeni. Usho mina, asazani mina naye. What does that say? Which means the day they fired me in 99, uNkulunkulu wayekhona. He guided me. Anginamuntu ke ngaleso sikhathi. Ubaba ngaleso sikhathi was about to start umsebenzi lo esengikuwo namhlanje. So I needed to be in the wilderness for all this time until nangibuya ngo-2009. Nayiseqala imvuselelo ngo-2010, 3 weeks. Ngikhona imvuselelo ngiyomele vele ngishayekile manje ngibuya ku-United Nations kodwa ngiphethe lutho. And then uthi beyikhona imvuselelo, I came. Ngifika emva kwayo ke ethendeni nakhona sithi siyobona nje omunye ugogo. Ngagcina ngithi ngizele lo gogo ngase ngibona yena. Usethi naye ekhuluma as if they've just had a conversation. Uthi this is you don't start a conversation like that. This is the person whom God has been waiting for. Sengiyabuza ubani loyo benixoxaphi. Ngani mina noNkulunkulu siyahlangana la sihlangana khona namhlanje yini indaba yami sixoxa utshela abanye abantu. Angazi ukuthi kanti sekukhona into ekuthiwa yi-prophetic dispensation, apostolic dispensation ngo-2010 ngalezo khathi. Ngamlaliswa ukuthi ngangishayekile. Not because ngifuna ukuzwa lento yakhe. Angiyizwa. Kumbula, I'm from a wilderness. And it has done me in. Sekukabili manje ngishaywe ngo-99, ngaphinde ngashaywa ngo-2008. Ngo-2008 ke ngishaywa impela ke. Umfowethu lo we-EFF babese eLimpopo ngaleso sikhathi. Nasiqala youth in energy and mining sector to say, let's liberate the economy because we see ANC ruling parties not talking about economy. Then I said to me, I'm qualified. I know this thing. Let me stage a civil movement. And we did. As we do it, Benza sure to convert that conference into an AGM and fire this way like Mteto because he's an instigator to all the young people. But before they fired me, I said, just give me a chance to speak my mind. Then I will exit the stage. I told the truth of what I now saw, not just in South Africa, in the United Nations, which I had a chance to go to. That the policies that are being done here are developed by United Nations. And they have nothing to do with the local content. It is researchers appointed by UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, speaking general for all of us because their agenda is to influence all of us to look like West. So if unenkinga masulumane ukuthi nawo atafuna ukudla wonke umhlaba, the West is doing the same to colonize us. They killed Kwame Nkrumah, the first independent president of Ghana, because he wrote a book called Neo-Colonialism. Let me come to that one, by the way. Before Ghana was independent, there was a meeting of Banking Association of the World. They said the following: we are about to experience an independence of African countries, but let us do what we call puppet regimes of African states. When Africans think they are being free and independent, Gandhi, they are now being our puppet as governors, as presidents of African countries. And we're going to start with Kwame Nkrumah as the first president of Ghana, 1957. So we entered the independence era already on a wrong footing, wherein the spirit behind the African independence, the Pan-Africanism we're talking about, is already laid by Europeans to say they are all puppets. That includes Mandela. By the way, no, I'm saying Mandela because they say all African independence, and South Africa was the last one. So when you see these African presidents who are the founders in their countries, you must know you're looking at a puppet, according to Europeans. No wonder no African country is successful. It's based on the wrong foundation. I've just quoted you a conference that met before all of you can be free. It decided your fate. And South Africa was not excluded from that. And I blame South Africa, by the way. Why? Mandela Kakul. Why? You had an opportunity to have seen all the other African independents. They are a lie. And you could reference them and make South Africa better. You fall on the same ditch. I'm talking records. Okay, let me go deeper so that you understand governance issues. There was a meeting at DBSA by Bob Mandela at night with all CEOs of companies here in South Africa. We call them the MEC Group, Minerals and Energy Complex Group. Why they went to DBSA offices in Midrand is because in Joburg, there were meetings. And then the whites are staying in town. But what is this gathering for? Just after Mandela was released. Now, if you want records of this, go to Professor Sompi Terreblanche, economics lecture. He is the one who writes about this. Stellenbosch. He says, Mandela, why are you engaging these guys? Because out of that meeting, Bati, Mandela, please compromise the struggle agenda of Africans. Allow our properties and companies and the wealth we've accumulated over the years in South Africa to be protected through a constitutional clause called Section 25 of the Constitution, which you go and find. It means, if you don't know it, protection of the property of the minority. It's me putting of the minority. I'll give reasons. In court, you need to give reasons. No one owned anything who is black at that time. So all the things you see, the buildings, you name it, belong to whites. It is a white regime. So why put Section 25 in the Constitution unless you're protecting something from us? Remember, in the discussion, negotiation, nothing came of us. But here, at Brandhurst and Oppenheimer, you don't discuss land, you don't discuss economy, you don't discuss, take our property. Just take the chairs in Parliament and make laws. But when you make laws, make them on top of our laws. You don't change Roman, Dutch, and British laws. So here you are, subtending your democracy, your freedom, on a wrong foundation. Scripture, I'm a strict foundation, I'm a cracks. So you're building a South African dispensation of independence and freedom on a colonial order foundation. You build on this. So Ubaba, yes, I understand. That's where compromise took place. Let me give you another meeting. Brandhurst Estate of Oppenheimer, in that house, in Johannesburg. Lapho ke sekuzidlanzane ke manje. Usho ubaba uNxamalala noMbeki and then Nayo Mandela. They are meeting to say the economy, land aside, then we allow you in. Babu Cyril, the current president with you, current ambassador in the US now, Ruth Mayer, they were in the Constitutional Assembly, tightening the bolts that this constitution read the way we're reading it today. And when you read this constitution, it protects white minority property because the property of blacks was taken in 1913, at least I'm paraphrasing. It actually started back in 1847. Charles Saunders in the Land Delimitation Commission, but as calling on 1913 because that's what the Constitution says. From 1913 on the 19th of June, they took the land of Amakosi. In 1955, Forced Removal Act, they took also blacks in all prime land in towns and cities. In 1975, Expropriation Act. Now go back. Today, this week, the same whites are challenging Expropriation Act, which Babu Cyril has signed into law. They say, we the whites don't like this law. I don't have a problem with that. Here's my analysis. Their problem is that blacks are now going to use the same expropriation law which the whites used to gain land, which is now in the hands of whites. Now they are saying, let's abolish this law. I say, I'm fine with that. I'm a law student. I'm fine with that. Asenze kanjena-ke. Yini le eningasayithandi ngo-Expropriation Act, which ngo-75 you liked, is this one. It was nice when Expropriation Act was passed to take the land of blacks, to give to whites. So when blacks must pass the same law under your Roman Dutch and British law so that they return the stolen spoils, you have a problem as whites. Okay, I don't mind. I'm very understanding and reasonable, rational, I'm studious. Can you then bring back all the spoils you got through Expropriation Act in 1975 till today? Then you go to court and abolish Expropriation Act for yourself because you no longer like it. It means the following. You no longer have confidence on the laws you passed in 1975. In 2026, you're saying that law must be abolished because we're no longer in the white order. So you have a problem with blacks. I'm going to provoke you with a question from this. And here's my question. Where are the Christian whites in this gathering? Where? Where are the Christian whites in this? You don't need to answer me. Answer it in your heart. Let me tell you why they are not here. Their God, which they purport to be the same as our God, as black Christian. It's okay when we hug some and Africans. Let's work together. Christians, we're all Bible carrying, tongue talking, devil chasing, and all of that. It's fine. But the gains they made during the white dispensation order where they benefited, they say, God, this was our blessing we got from you, from these blacks. It can't be that now you dispossess us of these spoils, which we call a blessing. Now, my question to Christians, black and white, you are united in the Lord. Okay, let's give you benefit of doubt. You are united. But I don't see it here. And by the way, it's not this meeting alone. Where all black Christians gather, whites are not there. I can take it further. Where are our Indian fellows? They are also meeting in their corner. So, we are not united in us being returned our spoils. Let me take it deeper on us blacks alone now. Let's leave the whites, let's leave Indians. Remember, I've done history of the laws. There is a law called Group Areas Act. It means different racial groups staying separate from one another. But they worship the same God. I've never seen a single Christian meeting addressing the injustices of the past in this country by Christians, white and black. Has never. I can give you the attempt we made, Tina, in 96 in Bloemfontein as Christian students. In that meeting, we were trying to unite with SCM, Student Christian Movements, into SCO. That's the day I learned Amandia, they worship alone, colored community, Khoi and San worship alone, and blacks worship alone, and so on. Under God. Where was God when the Christians separated in 1965? And it's difficult to unite them. Leave that. That is easy to do. Here's the problem. The benefits they are enjoying, the white race, in Section 25, protection of the property of the minority. My question, the property that they are seeking, Babu Cyril Noruf Mayor, to protect the small enclave of white, was it not taken from a majority black? Okay. Your name, Itini? Nazia. Restore. Where is the God who restores? Oh, what are we restoring? As Gamoya Pel. Oh, it says well restored. We are restored now. Granted, in a mathematical equation, you will say given when you make deductions and conclusion. So we are restored in the Lord. Says ya call manje. So I assume. Call is of altar calls. Fine. between a white person who's a Christian and a black person who's a Christian, when they pray to God, and I will make myself as a reference, when I pray to God to say, God, please restore me all that which was taken from me. Am I not speaking against a white Christian who benefited from the spoils that were taken from blacks? Those white Christians are part of my prayer that must be answered by this God. I wonder if they have their God, which is not my God. That's why I'm asking, are you united also in the Lord? It looks like you have two separate gods. Lower Belungu does not tell them to return spoils that were taken from the previously disadvantaged. And I'm a white Christian, don't talk that language. They say you are racist, you're promoting divisions amongst the people. Okay, fine, I don't have a problem. Is he quiet as well? So it's a when we come here, white and black Christian. Okay. You think that I'm making up a story, right? I have a map of KZN. And in that map, it's written, my king, King Tingswai of the Mteto tribe. The biggest tribe that gave birth to the Zulu kingdom. A map of this province. Before whites change it and put their white names, I have the original. Now, under King Tingswai, we had 30 tribes under him. So when we talk in terms of land mass, from Umhlatuze River to Umfolozi, the Swart and White Umfolozi, that entire jurisdiction belongs to my tribe. Where is it today? Kukemurs and Siens and Aldaimense, Afrikaners, they say, hier is ons tweede vaderland. Ja, my God het ons hierdie grond gegee. Praising God about the blessing they received from the Mtetwa land. No. Now I'm a believer now. And I'm a governor. And I'm a lawmaker. And I'm a history student. I'm bringing my case to Parliament. Where is my land according to the Bill of Rights? Somebody needs to protect my land. And I'm afraid it's going to be some of the Christian whites and Christian Indians and sometimes Chinese and Arabs. Are you going to bring back my land? Or you want me to still continue to serve this God who doesn't return my things? But every time your God answers you to keep my land from me. It's fine when I didn't know it. Now I know you're sitting on my land as my fellow brother in Christ. Can't we resolve that matter? For the sake of national unity, how do we unite? How do we have joint sessions of prayer and all these intercession? What are we interceding for? The mistakes you are crying about, Ubab Mandela, I don't blame him. In as much as I said, I'm focusing on him. He didn't have that ancient spiritual discernment which you Christians have. It is you who can see through the Spirit to say, this is our Kairos time. God has returned the times which we lost opportunities in that season. He then returns a season. Inside the season, the spoils of what you lost because you didn't know anything. He returns an opportunity through Land Claim Act of 1994 as per 1913 Land Act disposition. Abazalane, did you lodge claims to return your land? Yes, you prayed. I know that you were praying for a democratic dispensation, but you missed the plot. 94 and Fagangama claims. No, I'm sitting in the land claim. I'm sitting in the portfolio committee on land. I don't see your claims as Christians. Okay, I know why there are no claims of the Christian. You divorced yourself from your tribal nations where you come from. Because then you're called. You know, Jesus, no Moengwele. But Moengwele didn't remind you. I read a scripture that says, he will remind you. Moengwele didn't remind black Christian of what was stolen from them, so that come this dispensation of land claim, they can lodge claim to get their land back. The reason why the church is poor is not because of any other reason, it's because we don't own factors of production in economics. And what are factors of production? Land, buildings, owner's equity. What is owner's equity? Banks, labor. You think you are black, then you're owning labor. No, white consultants firm are owning labor that is deployed in businesses. And that business is white business. You think when Mandela met these CEOs of these companies, they were meeting to discuss about Children Foundation of Mandela and Nelson Mandela, what? No. They were discussing that when you sit in parliament, you don't pass any law that will dispossess us. We will rather give you a version of what black economic empowerment is going to be. And Sanlam is the first company to say that. Ubaba Patrice, which is now one of the directors. So they decided who amongst the black leaders who will be co-opted. That's what we did. That's how we lost the plot as blacks now, including Christian. Blacks, in the first conference, which was here in Durban, Westville, of the ANC, after unbanning, all the 80 members of the ANC, they were co-opted into the white business. When they got to parliament, they closed their mouth. Banzani, when a rat eating bread in the dark, and he's saying, I don't think there is a baker who's making this bread because I've never seen him before. And it goes on to say, I don't think there is a ball and flour to make this nice bread because I've never seen it before. That is a rat eating a bread in the dark. Our politicians, they got co-opted into the white establishment. That was the end of the struggle agenda. That's why 32 years later, you are still where you are. Why? These meetings in Kulumangazo, compromises and sacrifices. Blacks became another sacrifice in that meeting. To say, no. This is how whites operate. No, money on no arguments, man. That's no men say so no. Fatnet a big 3, 4, 5. Bring them yellow. Then comes haksam and this eerie piece of hate. Then money for their other men need that year. So you say, bring a few, we eat together. That's what they did. So anyone who got an invitation to be co-opted or attached to the one who's co-opted, their lives changed. Our life didn't change. Now, this is the verdict. In my waiting in 25 years, we were in a prayer in Ubabalo's church for 24 days, fasting. A call came and said, Mtetwa, I see people dividing land in Transvaal. You've been fighting for Marabastan. Come, nang figure, Big Bang report. Land claims report. Check this one. Done by Southern African Christian Organized and Training Society. Those are Christians who helped Amakosi to claim the land. What happened to the report? It's 2017. I had to name my child Divine because Baba Simula was preaching about divine nature. First revelation, I said, I'm a public ministry student. I never heard this report. I said, bring the report to me. They brought it to me. These days, as you invited me here, I called the DG, who used to be a DG at that time. He's now DG of Agriculture. I said, DG, there's no way you will know this report. I need the truth of this report because it looks like Amakosi claimed the land. And there are references to the effect. And check how big this land, the entire Transvaal. You know what Transvaal is? That means 6 provinces, including parts of KZN. It is where South Africa was first named. So the name South Africa is Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek. That's a Dutch name. it was in those provinces. So it would be your Free State, Northwest, Gauteng, Mpumalanga, Limpopo, and parts of KZN, because in Newcastle, Utrecht, Vryheid are part of the old Transvaal map. So when that lodging was done, we also benefited as KZN. But I have the one for KZN independent. This is where Christians, I need you to do justice. Nithi nithandazela uNkulunkulu obuyiselayo, who restores justice, righteousness. Unrighteous practices happened from 94 till today. Christians are quiet. Ubaba Alan Bosak was taken to jail, and when he went to jail, he took the church to jail with him. And when he returned, the church lost credibility because here is a criminal pastor who was said to be who have robbed donation funds. That's not the reason. The reason was he was protecting ministers who could not be discredited. They said, please take a fall. Without knowing, as he takes the fall, the church took a fall. No wonder the church can't say any word. Why? When judgment is made in the spirit, it says you have a criminal record as a pastor. How so? The monies you diverted to political gains instead of the poor who were dying, which you needed to bury. It was a struggle at that time. There was no money. So my point is, Baba, can be released, yes. I'm sharing these things. You understand how deep and heavy for me. No schooling I received for that. No prophetic school. Sibonge ubaba Masimula wangifaka isiguqo leso ngalo 10 years. Ethi nje ngiyakulungisa. Ngiyakulungisa lokho engipheka nje. Athi uNkulunkulu uthi ngikutshela ukuthi uzokunika umusa. Ngithi yini le? Umusa okwenzani ngoba phela sengihambele idibanga lapha. Ngimdala enkosini nje ba ungibona. Yes, I don't look like one of the church. It's because of the environment which I was exposed to. I needed to take a fall, an undefined fall, just to inherit a report that was secret. uNkulunkulu wayenzile restoration and put me in the land reform portfolio committee in agriculture, where the whites are sitting, who says, here is ons tweede vaderland. I said, no, you're lying. So as we speak, a matter is outstanding in court, not in court, because even in court it passed, by the way. The city of Pretoria belongs to Amandebele. Like it or not, I have a gazette to that effect in case you want to dispute my claims. So if I bring you prima facie evidence, how do you then dispute my case? And I will bring you a reference number. If you have a claim on land, you need to give me a reference number. Let alone ukuthi ubaba azange abatshela abantu ukuthi ambani oclaim umhlaba wethu because naye akawazi. That report came a long time, by 98. We are sitting as South Africans. The poverty, the landlessness, the xenophobic attacks is a result of the silence of the church. No one from the church is able to speak because we're not even knowledgeable of what happened. Mina kangazi ke lo moya ngcwele esinawo kanti wona uhamba ufike phi? Uhamba nje lapha uphelele lapha. Uyasontisa. Awukhulumi lutho ngenhlupho yabantu. Do you understand the injustice that was done at Emakhosini? Go check chapter 12 of the Constitution. It says, role of traditional leaders. Bese iti recognition of traditional leaders. Bese yaphela lapha. Hamba uye chapter 7 on local government. It says local government shall be autonomous in their function. That, according to law, is powers. Ngape Emakhosini, no powers. Let's go to 98 White Paper on Local Government Systems Act and Structures Act. Nothing is said about Emakosi, yet they are the landlords in every local municipality jurisdiction. So, in law, we say they were systematically and structurally marginalized to participate in local government. That's why Emakosi are on a pimbo. Don't you remember the statement I quoted here? Let's destroy their heritage and culture and give them English, French, Spanish, German, Belgium cultures. So what we have become is what our colonizers wanted us to be, including us as Christians. We are part of the problem. And that's the debt we don't want to admit as abazalwane. Nginenkinga ke nalo uNkulunkulu. uNkulunkulu wabelungu akabatsheli ukuthi babuyise into zethu. Uyabatshela ukuthi masihlanganeni. Uyasho ukuthi let's work together. I don't have a problem with that. But bese gcina lapho. So ubani ozophendulwa phakathi komlungu nami? Kakhulukazi mina ngiyabona nina abanye. Mina onala maqiniso. With this prima facie evidence against the white, not just the white Christians, white combined. Because when I speak now, I speak for all white. Because even if you can say, I'm a Christian, I'm converted, I'm no longer part of those people, you benefited. And because of that benefit, you don't say anything. I've never seen a Christian standing up who is white who says, "Laat ons bring terug die grond vir die swart mense." None. They don't say that they're enjoying the God's blessing. So I have a problem with this blessing. You are outside the economy, and you will never be, because systematically you're out. Out of 63 million, you are 92%, and all of you, 92%, you're outside the economy, including those who are in parliament like us. So when we do numbers, we are included that we are landless. We don't own factories of production. Who owns the banks? Not a black person. Why so? Is it a natural phenomenon that blacks are owned by whites? No, it's part of the protection clause. Okay, let me show you another misnomer. A few days ago, the president gets a judgment from a high court which is below the constitutional court through the Chief Justice whom he appointed, Chief Justice Maya. He appoints this Chief Justice as president. Then when this Chief Justice issues a judgment against him, he approaches a lower court in Western Cape. And that high court has audacity to rule against a Chief Justice and say the president is acquitted and exempted from your judgment. On those bases, the impeachment process of parliament is not going to begin until the president is granted a review. How does a lower court reviews? Okay, if you don't have a problem with that, let's go back to the Zuma case. Zuma case by Zondo was given a judgment sentence to go to jail. He went to jail. When he appealed, they said, no, you can't appeal. A Supreme Court decision is final. It's the supreme authority of the land. Huh. Moments later, another judgment for another leader who were in the same equal footing. That one is a former, that one is a current. Now there is what we call a crossroad in law. Roman Dutch and British law is in crisis. How will you erase the precedent? That's what we call it in law. The precedents you've set. If Chief Justice can be challenged, all of us are going to challenge her. Using even a small claim court. Why not? You've done it. And you're the first citizen. So when I say I have a problem with Roman and Dutch and British law, you think I'm a constitutional delinquent. Our president has just done that. How do I then believe this thing? Niyabona ukuthi nginenkinga nekwezo kamoya nginenkinga engakanani. Ngoba uNkulunkulu kamoya engcela wangapha akangiphenduli mina. Abelungu uyabafadalisha, uyabaprotecta, uyabacoverisha uNkulunkulu lo. Mina mthetho, I'm not being covered, I'm not being fathered. Now what is this? No, mina ngibona ukuthi akuyekwe mos ngoba nje alikho iqiniso lapha. Asiyekeni. I mean really I'm issuing it's a reflection. Asiyekeni. Okay. Ngihlala phansi manje. Okay, when you read the book, it's page 83. It says the paramount of the Mthethwas. When they describe King Israel, they say the following. He said, I will rise amongst the kings to establish God's order. Those words were said over 208 years ago. No one has found those words, only me. And I'm a Mthethwa, and a descendant, and designate to take after him. And I'm implementing those words to stand up for God's order. I wonder which order you're standing on. But this God this time has given me prima facie evidence to say, when I make a claim for my land, oh, by the way, my name is Zolak. Zolak means landlord, right? So, which means, landlord, portfolio committee on land, I'm a Kosi, I'm restoring all of those things. I'm a law student. So I'm restoring. So I'm saying, I said this in 2022, the restoration era of the kings, their rulership, their power by law of this land has now been restored. And I said there's a revolution, not a revolution, but a revival. A revival is coming in the African continent through South Africa, and in South Africa through KwaZulu-Natal. Why? We still have Amakhosi who are owning 2.8 million hectares of land. And we are part of the beneficiaries of that land. The biggest debate now is about land. Let me tell you what Mandela de Klerk and Mtwana Kapindingana promised the Zulu king, who is late also, just before the elections of 94. They said the Zulu kingdom shall become a constitutional monarch, and the international community will come as witnesses to that effect. 32 years later, nobody remembered that. I reminded Parliament about that promise. And then the speaker asked, who has a problem with what Mtetwa is reminding Parliament on 22 years ago? They said, no one. So the entire Parliament agreed to say the Zulu kingdom must be what it was promised to be, constitutional monarch. So, this is the deduction and conclusion, is that the king must now establish the government in KwaZulu-Natal. A king. By laws of this land, based on what I've just said. In Parliament, go to Hansard record. You will find my argument and the entire Parliament agreeing. Abasalwane baphi in this equation? Because uNkulunkulu uthi uyena ovusa amakhosi. Nikuphi entweni yamakhosi bazalwane? You are quiet. Why? Nithanda King Charles as opposed to the Zulu king. But what you are making as a mistake is that your name, surname, tribe is a beneficiary in the land claim in Ngonyama Trust land. There is a law, precept of the provincial legislature that says abakwacele banendawo yabo, abakwamthetho banendawo yabo, and abakwakhwela banendawo yabo. But abazalwane abakholwayo don't even know that record. uNkulunkulu abuyise kanjani? How does he restore? How will God restore when the believers don't even have content, material substance, that which the Holy Spirit must remind them on to say, hey, kwakhwela, don't mind those who are sitting on surface. They are owing you. We're going to do what we call opportunity cost. In opportunity cost, it means the value of the forgotten opportunity. What does it mean? It means from the day you took my land until today, and you made so much money, the money you made over time is deducted and conclusion belongs to me. Therefore, you pay me all of that money or you vacate. I will take over from here. Are you ready, those who are occupying people's land? Because I've got a map to that effect. So, all of you are covered. The original map of KwaZulu-Natal never had the British names. It had surnames of tribes. And Bazalwane, they are included. That's the revolution. That's the prayer you must be praying God to restore you on. Don't mind about the Christian whites who benefited. God will convict them. If you believe that he convicts. But let's stand on the truth and see. Mina ngithi as a governor, God has already answered. It is our ignorance that has made us to be where we are, not because of anything else. Leadership crisis. That leadership crisis is a result of ignorance, lack of information. And my people perish because of the lack of knowledge. I'm in love with my voice. I'll talk all the time. Thank you. Let me see.
I want to recognize Pastor Wayne before he goes out. He's also a member of parliament under the ACDP. We also have Brother Jamal. Brother Jamal, are you gone already? He's a councillor within the Durban Metro. Thank you very much for having graced us with your presence, Pastor Wayne. Thank you. Sizokhomenta kulokuzana kababa umthetho dingiswayo ukhuluma njengenkosi singahlala phansi bangcwele I quickly want to call on Dr. Lushaba. Ngiyazi ukuthi anikhathele bazana ngoba ngizwa ngami. Bengizonizwa. Bengizonizwa. Hayi. Ngiyanazi anikhathele. No, ngiyazwa. No, ne grand. So I want Dr. Lushaba to come. I don't want to put him on a disadvantage of delivering after lunch. After lunch is over my engagements. Let him come and we give him his 45 minutes. Amen. Thank you.
Sanibonani. Ninjani namhlanje? Ngiyaphila nami, ngicela sihlale phansi. I suspect that what Utingiswayo didn't say is that virtually every clan in KwaZulu-Natal has ubukhosi. So nami ngisuke ebukhosini bakalishaba. So if you extended more than 45 minutes to Utingiswayo, ngobe esuke ebukhosini, nami ngisuke ebukhosini. Thank you very much. Ngiyabonga kakhulu. Ngibingelele kubafundisi abakhona, ngibingelele kubona bonke ngesixhosa sithi onyawonhle, ngiphinde ngibe umxhosa sometimes. Ngibingelele nakubo bonke abasivakashele namhlanje abasezikhundleni ezihlukene. Ngicela ukuthi nje all protocol observe so that ngingaziboni ngisenkingeni. So I have a very unenviable task of speaking after such an articulate chief or king. And I'm sure, you know, if you were in my position, you would say, well, you are better off sitting that side than me, standing this side. But let me give it my utmost. I want to begin first, Chair, by imploring your permission to first greet and thank most earnestly Apostle Kwela of the Kingdom Institute for inviting me to this very important leadership and governance conference. Mkapazi, thank you very much. I do not take it for granted. But I also do want to greet and most respectfully our esteemed panelists, some of whom have already spoken, some of whom are yet to speak. I do want to greet them most respectfully. And when I did see the names of the people who are speaking here today, I wondered how my name ended up in this list. I was certain that there had been some mistake somewhere. But lastly, I also do want to acknowledge and greet everyone who's here present, that you have elected to be here rather than be elsewhere attending to your everyday existential needs or existential problems does not go unnoticed. As Commandante Chavez says, love can only be paid with love. I do hope that would not only give you a worthwhile intellectual discussion this afternoon, but would also in the process show you the love you've shown us by being here. So I suspect that at this point I am now in a position then to begin. So the title that organizes my intellectual labor this afternoon flows logically from the theme for this session, which is governance for public value. So my title, as I've said, flows logically from this theme for our session, which, as I've said, is governance for public value. So building on that theme, I have elected to title my presentation as follows: South Africa's governance crisis as evidence of the inadequacies of the legal rational form of authority. So what I'm going to try and do, which if you follow closely, I differ a bit with Utingswai. I think that there is something that is missing in the analysis that Utingswai is presenting us, which is to present individuals as if they make history under their own conditions. There are very serious structural constraints that people live under and make decisions under. So I teach in a university, in a very racist university of Cape Town. I know that it's a racist university, but I have to teach there. Because for it to change, I have to be there. So anyone who comes years later is going to say, if he says then that I had agency, why didn't I go to a black university? People make decisions under material conditions. And so I'm going to suggest in my analysis that there may be structural constraints that if we ourselves who proclaim to have such agency were put under, would take exactly the same decisions that the Mandelas and everyone else took. What is important is to change the structure, leave the individuals, such that the structure enables people to take the kinds of decisions they want to take. So I'm going to do a much more structural analysis of the constraints that have led us to the kinds of governance crises that we are in. And so as I've said, the title is South Africa's Governance Crisis as Evidence of the Inadequacies of the Legal Rational Form of Authority. I see that again, Utingswai harps quite a lot on this form of authority that is founded on law. And perhaps to put the cart before the horse, I think there's a mistake, or one of the things that the pit hole that we've found ourselves as the country is to assume that law is the final arbiter of truth. Law is not the final arbiter of truth. That something is legally correct does not mean that it is the final truth. There are many people who have not been found legally in the wrong, but who we know that are not worthy of the name umuntu. So we don't require the law to tell us that lona umuntu, lona again umuntu. So why do we then depend entirely on this thing we call legal rational authority when we know that it is not the final arbiter of truth? So what I'm suggesting, as I've said, is that South Africa's governance crisis is basically evidence of the inadequacies or the limitations of the legal rational form of authority. Put simply, my object is to demonstrate to you the serious limitations of a governance and leadership approach whose sole foundation is the language of law. So I'm going to suggest to you that if you have a governance and a leadership approach whose sole foundation is the language of law or the legal precepts, you are bound to run into the crisis that the country has run into. In the disciplines of the university, we refer to such governance and leadership approach as the legal rational authority or bureaucratic authority. That kind of authority that is founded on law, we refer to it as the legal rational authority or bureaucratic authority. And so to be able to prove to you that the crisis of governance and the crisis of leadership in this country is as a result of an over-reliance on legal rational authority, I've organized my presentation into 3 parts. So the first part, I'm going to elaborate to you, I'm going to explain to you the meaning and implications. I'm going to try and elaborate the meaning and implications of what we call legal rational authority or bureaucratic authority. What is this thing we call legal rational authority or bureaucratic authority? That's going to be the first part of my talk. The second part is going to be an attempt to understand how exercising authority that is based solely on the language of law came to dominate in South Africa. How did we end up with a situation where legal rational authority or bureaucratic authority became so dominant in South Africa post-1994? The aim in that second part, where I'm going to try and explain to you how legal rational authority became so dominant in South Africa in 1994, the aim there is two-pronged. One, it is to examine what are the issues, what are the concerns, what are the interests that are from ab initio excluded from consideration when you have an approach to authority and governance that is founded on legal rational authority. Let me be specific. So, the first part I'm going to try and explain to you what is legal rational authority. The second part I'm going to try and show you how this form of authority and how this approach to governance that is based on the language of law became dominant in South Africa post-1994. Under that, in the second section, I'm going to then ask a question: what interests, what concerns get excluded from consideration once you have a governance and a leadership approach that is founded on legal rational authority? The second part of the second part, what I'm going to be doing there is to unmask the political interests that operate behind or that are best served by this overemphasis on legal rational authority. So the second part, or the second intention in the second part, is to show you what are the political interests that actually operate behind this legal rational authority. Not because I completely disagree with Dingiswayo, but I want to, because the examples are fresh from what he's been saying. So if you think of independence, if you think of 1994 in South Africa as a moment of independence, 1994 in South Africa basically represents the same thing as 1960 in the rest of the continent when most other African countries gained independence. Now there are things that any country that gains independence does. It doesn't require any justification for them. When countries became independent, they changed the country's names. Many of them changed their currencies. Many of them changed the names of the places, to reflect the original owners. And many of them redistributed the spoils, or rather, the wealth of the country. So Zimbabwe didn't have to wait a day more to change from Southern Rhodesia to Zimbabwe. Just like Zambia did not wait a day extra. The day independence arrived, they changed the names because those things are taken to be a sine qua non for independence. They are logical things that anyone who's gained independence does. In South Africa, there is a curious thing that happens, which is that you still require a separate legal process to change the names. The other countries do not require a separate process, right? Because these are things that we take to be as I've said, a sine qua non for independence, why do you then here require a different process? It is the over-dominance of legal rational authority. And so there are political interests that are served by this legal rational authority. It's not neutral as it appears. It presents itself as neutral, as law, as fairness, but otherwise it hides the political interests that are best served by this process. And so you may then, if you don't realize this, if you don't do a structuralist analysis, not realize that the land claims process itself is part of that process. It was not in any way going to lead to anything. Because I may not have, as Lwazilu Shaba, a claim to lodge with the Land Claims Court or the Land Claims Commission. But I know that if Utingiswayo had land in the way we lived in times past, and he saw that I was poor, he would have given me part of the land. So I don't need to have a personal claim to the land. But if he had land, bezongisikela, and then I would live and then I would prosper. But what the legal process of land claim does, it says, give us evidence that land was ever taken from you. So if I don't have that evidence as an individual, then there's nothing to say. But I do know deep down that I might not have been this poor. I might not have the language with which to say what is wrong with this land claims process. So that is the legal claims process. That legal rational logic behind it is a problem. Let's not venerate it. It was not going to lead to anything, Tingswai. Its intention was precisely to maintain wide ownership of land. The problem is not Section 25. We were defeated somewhere else. I'll show you where we were defeated. So, what I'm going to do in the last section, as I've said, is to unmask the political interests that are best served by this legal rational form of authority or by this legal rational approach to governance. And then lastly, the third section is basically going to ascertain the adequacy of the legal rational form of authority or governance when measured against the challenges of post-colonial South Africa, or when measured against the challenges of post-1994 South Africa. How helpful is this legal rational form of authority when it is measured against the challenges that we are faced with today? Now, if I want to summarize what I'm going to be saying to you here, let me conjure up an example. So many of you would have heard that there is an office in this country that is very powerful of the Auditor General. And of course, you have to, if you are entrusted with public funds, you must make sure that you spend the public funds in accordance with a number of laws, the Public Finance Management Act, and of course, you must comply with other, prescripts of the Auditor General. You can summarize these prescripts into rationality, economic rationality. You buy the best, with cost. That's basically the summary of all these precepts. You go for the best value, or rather for the best product, that money gives you. What I'm trying to say to you, what I'm going to be saying to you in simple words is this. When you work in that environment and you have to comply with these prescripts, ask the Auditor General one day, what is the cost of correcting history? In all of these principles of good governance that you tell us that we must comply with, where does the cost of correcting history falls? Because the cost of correcting history might not fit into your prescripts of, a legal rational spending of finances. It might mean that I spend finances unequally, between different races, or even in a not economically rational way. That's the cost of addressing history. So that's all I'm going to be. If you want a summary of what I'm going to be doing, is to show you that this veneration of law, when you then say the problem with the country is that, politicians, do not follow the law, do not follow the rules are never on your side. Even if they followed them to the letter, you won't get value for leadership. Because the laws were never meant to serve you. I can give you a bad example, but it will drive the point home. I teach at the University of Cape Town. Many of you think that it's the best university, or it's one of the best universities. Racism and good education don't sit together. So don't go around saying it's the best university. I mean, if it's a racist university, it can't be the best. Because racism and good education don't go together. Black kids come to the University of Cape Town, and they compete with white students. I know for a fact that white students have an advantage. But there is no law that I can point you to that the university has broken. So what law am I going to turn to in this legal rational authority in order to be able to point to the fact that white students are advantaged? So the laws, this veneration of due process, let's follow the law, otherwise, the roads wouldn't have been like this. It was always meant to be like this. White people had always known it was going to be like this because it proves a point they've always wanted to make, that black people can't govern themselves. And so, in order to validate, and by the way, that's not a personal view of one or two white people. For centuries, Europeans have convinced themselves that that's the case. And so, a truth of centuries for them cannot be undone by one country, South Africa, which has, by the way, one of the other challenges that you have, which is not a matter of law. If you read closely what has been written about South Africa, it's the first country where black people rule over whites. It's the first country in the world. Think for a moment of a country where black people have to legislate over white people. When I say legislate, I don't mean making law in parliament. I mean legislate in a sense that you have to determine their cultural life and everything. It is within your power to determine how they live and everything. It's the only country. And whiteness the world over is convinced that it can never be allowed. And so the laws are not going to help you. But let me not get ahead of myself. I was trying to illustrate to you what is my point about this legal rational authority, this form of authority that is founded on law that we celebrate so much as if it was going to deliver us, anything. So, as I've said, the first part is trying to explicate what exactly is legal rational authority. Let me try and tend to that, task, basically, of the presentation, which is, as I've said, to make sense, of what we mean by legal rational authority. So legal rational authority is best understood in contradistinction to two other forms of authority that are widely recognized in modern statecraft or in modern statehood. The other two, or the first of the other two, is what we call traditional authority, as we know it, best exemplified by traditional leadership. Broadly defined, of course, to include not just traditional leadership as we know it, but those who assume authority or positions on the basis of hereditary rules. So this is what we mean by traditional authority. Broadly, it is to include those who assume their positions on the basis of hereditary rules. The second form of authority is what we know as charismatic authority. Basically, this is authority exercised or assumed neither on hereditary basis nor on legal basis. Charismatic people are able to wield a lot of authority even outside of legal rational authority or even outside of outside of traditional authority. They don't require any of those. They are basically able to command their authority on the basis of their charisma. But legal rational authority is the one that is closely identified with modern states. It is also closely associated with, or at other times defined, through what we know as the Weberian principles of bureaucracy. Now, basically, Max Weber, who's considered to be the father of, bureaucracy, gave us what he calls the principles of bureaucracy. These are the bases on which bureaucracy functions. And I'm going to mention just three which are useful for us to understand legal rational authority, because legal rational authority basically flows from these principles of bureaucracy given to us by Max Weber. One, he says that the bureaucracy must function on the basis of impersonality. One, bureaucracy must be impersonal. So the people you see when you sit on this other side of the counter, in a government office, they must just be people. You must not relate with them on the basis of any personal affections. So it must be impersonal. The larger discourse that enables these impersonal relations in government or in bureaucracy is basically the reduction of human beings into numbers, statistics. So you see, when you encounter, for instance, bureaucrats these days in government, they are fond of doing this. The CEO of Mshieni, Prince Mshieni, might say that, oh no, we've done well this year because we've reduced, mortality that arises directly out of negligence by 10%. And as such, mortality on the basis of negligence. This is basically people who die as a result of negligence in a hospital. The CEO would say we've reduced them down. They are only about 5%. And you celebrate. This is literally a human being who died because they left him on the floor or her on the floor. But you see, because the logic of legal rational authority reduces human beings into numbers, you don't see that actually this person is saying there is 5% of people that we just left to die unnecessarily so. So the logic of impersonality basically says that you must consider people to be nothing but statistics. How many people did you help today? Or how many people came to? That you were sitting on this side of the window, there was an old woman right at the back of the queue. Your impersonality does not allow you to say, wait a moment, because impersonality, the principles of impersonality do not allow. See, this is the fallacy of Western-derived ways of thinking, particularly a discourse on feminism. By now, if that discourse was honest, this country would long have decided that pregnant women and women carrying infants and elderly women should be the first to be helped in any institution. But you see, because feminism is for young professional women who are still agile, active, it doesn't occur to them. It's not founded on the society. This is legal rational. Let's return to the point. So legal rational authority is defined and associated to Weberian principles of bureaucracy. And one of the most important principles of Weberian bureaucracy is the principle of impersonality. And I've just illustrated to you how it is possible to achieve this impersonality. 2, it is the principle of merit-based validation or appointment. But for everything, basically, legal rational authority says it must be on the basis of merit. So it's merit-based decision making. 3, and by the way, this is, if you were looking for that advantage I spoke of that white students have, it is simply that they come to class and they say, here it's going to be on the basis of merit. Right? But we know that, for instance, who is able to make it on time to class? It's those who have transport, right? So if you're coming from Kaelicha, which is, 47 kilometers away from the University of Cape Town, where public transport, you are always going to be late. But you see, merit says we must award those who come to class on time every day with marks, right? And so I'm white. I glide with my car from the southern suburbs of Cape Town. I'm there every day when I want to. So I'm already ahead of you. Which law are you going to tend to? This due process that you talk about. Because merit says. So the second principle of legal rational authority is merit-based selection, decision-making, and everything else. 3, it says standardized formal rules and regulations that must govern all operations, all decisions and actions. Remember, you must note this well. It says you must have standard formal rules and regulations that govern all operations. So when I encounter a white student, I must have the same standard as I encounter a black student. This one speaks English. It's his or her natural language. This one, it's a learned language, and by the way, the teachers, in the location were busy protesting. They were never there to teach him English, but I have to demand the same standard. Because the principles of legal rational authority say that we must have formal, or rather standardized formal rules and regulations that govern all operations, all decisions, and all actions. So this is what we mean by legal rational authority. It adopted in toto the principles of the Weberian bureaucracy. This is why legal rational authority is at other times called bureaucratic authority. And so, to simplify, legal rational authority is a form of authority whose basis for legitimation and exercise is derived solely on what is provided for in law. It's a form of authority that derives its legitimacy solely on what is provided for in law or in other legal prescripts. Now, these prescripts, of course, they take different forms. They might not necessarily be law. There might be standard operating procedures and all such other things, and they must all be written. So as I've said, basically this is a form of authority whose basis for legitimacy and exercise is derived on what is provided for in law or in other legal prescripts, generally. So when those who exercise this form of authority, legal rational authority, have shown fidelity to the letter of the law and adhere to the prescriptions of the law, they are deemed to have exercised good governance and good leadership. So when people have basically done everything according to the letter of the law, then we say we've found good governance. So we may be hankering over or after a wrong tree, this thing called good governance and leadership, because basically, you know as well as I do, people get bonuses because they have clean audits, right? Whether the people have water or, people have the houses, the HOD of housing or the DG of housing might be going home with a hefty, bonus because he had or she had a clean audit. Good governance, right? And that has nothing to do with the reality of the people. So we say good governance basically is achieved because people have basically stuck to the letter of these legal prescripts. Cape Town, or rather the Western Cape province, is one of the provinces that, unfortunately, even the other provinces now take as an exemplar of good governance. People go to the Western Cape to benchmark. I mean, I hear close friends who come from the legislature in KZN and saying, no, we are in Cape Town, we've come to benchmark with, Cape Town, the Western Cape legislature because they always get clean audits and whatnot. Anyone who knows the Western Cape knows that it is one of the most obscene societies. It's the most racist society. The reason the white part of Cape Town functions is because it offloads the contradictions to the black areas. And so you are able to, if this is the logic of offloading contradictions to other part of Cape Town. If you have half of this hall and you own this half and you had the liberty to dump everything you don't like to this other part, your part would be the best. And you reserved all the resources that you have in order to provide yourself with good roads, with good housing and everything, and then you offload everything else you don't like to this other part. This is basically the Western Cape. That's why it functions, the white part of the Western Cape functions. If you want, examine closely how much the city of Cape Town spends for water in black locations compared to the white areas. The study found that they spend 10 times in white areas than they do in black areas. That's good governance, right? Because they get clean audits. They are able to, stick to the letter of the law. Remember the point we made. Law is not the final arbiter of truth. When people come to you and say they've been found correctly in law, tell them that that's not the final arbiter of truth. So, that's legal rational authority. It is basically founded, or its legitimacy derives solely on what is provided for in law or in other legal prescripts. And good governance, according to this form of governance, basically amounts to people abiding by the principles or the precepts of law. So what this basically means, what we've said, is that the real effects on the ground, on human beings, on society, do not matter for this form of authority. Good governance has no causal relationship with life on the ground. It has no causal relationship or direct relationship with how human beings on the ground basically feel. The supposition in this form of authority is that once people adhere to the prescripts of the law and other attendant codes, that will bring maximum operational efficiency. So let us grant the point, which is not a point basically, which is that the supposition is that if you adhere to these principles or to these legal prescripts, you are likely to end up with what they call maximum operational efficiency. You got the best value for money. But getting the best value for money doesn't mean that the lives changed. I can give you again a bad example from my university. My university, because I for a while sat in the council of the university. Finances are well run. It's one of the richest universities in the country. What makes it rich? It's because it invests in white people's companies. By the way, University of Cape Town made a lot of money out of Lonmin. That company where people were killed in Marikana. We had shares there. Good governance, right? The point is that the supposition is that you get maximum operational efficiency. True, the university is efficient, it functions. But what is the experience of black people who go to the university? Does that operational efficiency has anything to do with the experience of the black students who go there? Every day, I sit and I watch black students at the University of Cape Town getting disoriented, eventually having to drop out, because I can see very, very well they don't have the resources with which to cope with, the rigors of whiteness. Nothing else. See, they come from the white schools, you send them to, Mrs. Hudson told them you are very bright, in those white schools. And then they come to Cape Town, and then they meet, a very racist white lecturer who doesn't give a hoot about whether Mrs. Hudson told you that you are bright, and suddenly there's a disjuncture between what the child has known about himself or herself and what he finds in the university. Whereas they should have been told the truth. The world is white. It detests you. Develop resources to survive that. Then they will do better. That's why we do better in those white institutions, because we know white people detest us. We pay them back. That's all. When they encounter us, they know that they would meet their match. So don't go with the supposition that there is law that protects me, we are all equal, the same standards apply. You are black. The law can't tell you, unfortunately, that you are black, but you must see yourself every day that you are black. So my point is that operational efficiency, which is supposed to flow from legal rational authority, does not translate to good experience for black people. But let us trudge on. And so, when the functionaries of the state, as I've said, strictly abide by the legal prescripts governing their roles, it is supposed that good governance or efficiency will follow logically from there. This supposition that when functionaries of the state, adhere to the rules and the principles of legal prescripts, this supposition that then good governance would have flown, or rather would follow logically from there, is basically another way of supposing that what is legal is just. It's another way of supposing that what is legal is just. Or put differently, what I'm trying to say to you is that the actions of the state, when the actions of the state are legal, it does not necessarily mean that they are just. The actions of the state might be legal, but it does not mean that they are just, because legality and justice are two different things. So, when the state operates efficiently and delivers goods with technical precision, the term for this, is governance, or rather the term for this in governance and leadership courses and decision making is, the point is, when the state operates efficiently and delivers goods with technical precision, the term for this is, in university courses, is evidence-based governance or evidence-based decision making. Again, evidence, every time when people say evidence-based decision making and governance, often what they are asking for is statistical evidence. It is not historical evidence. It is statistical evidence. And what does statistical evidence, as we've illustrated, do? It is that it translates human beings into numbers. I can give you an example, which is what the Minister of Police does every year when they give us what is called crime statistics. So when the minister says that crime has been reduced by 80%, do you feel safer? Do you change behavior in any way and say, oh, by the way, now they say in South Africa crime is down by 90%. As a human being, do you go home and say, I don't need to pay ADT now, and do all of those things? Statistics has a relationship with reality only in extremes, at 0 and at 100%. Any other thing in between does not make sense in terms of human reality. Statistics make sense for you when someone brings numbers to you, say that is it 0 or is it 100%? Anything in between, you are going to actually sanction someone killing you. Because someone is going to say, we're doing very well. We've reduced crime by 60%. As I've just shown you, you might just be the 40% the next minute. So it does not change reality. All I'm doing here is to drive home the meaning and implications of legal rational authority. And one of which is that it promotes what it calls evidence-based decision making. And this evidence-based decision making basically does not answer questions about, for instance, a morally upright society, an inclusive society, or an equitable society. This kind of legal rational authority basically is unable to translate into a moral, an inclusive, and an equitable society. So I suspect that we have said enough about the character of legal rational authority, such that we may move to the second part of the discussion. But suffice to say, as we move to the second part, suffice to say that legal rational authority is compatible with historical injustice. We must know for all times that legal rational authority is compatible with historical injustice, just as technical efficiency is compatible with an amoral and valueless society. See, American society, to take an extreme, American society is very efficient, technically efficient. You only need to have studied it closely and experienced it to know its efficiency. Nothing is left to chance in America. Technically, they plan to the letter, but does it make it an inclusive, a value, or a moral society? No. Technical efficiency does not translate into an inclusive society. You see, in that extreme weather, in those extreme weather conditions in America, in a country that has so much money that it could resolve its problems of poverty, there are people who die, basically, they lack heat. This is a country that is able to generate excess heat, but because they don't have money to buy the heat. Technical efficiency. You don't pay for gas in America, they switch you off the next moment. In fact, it switches itself automatically. And so you are going to freeze. But technical efficiency does not translate into a humane society. So I think we've said enough. What I want us to do now is to move to the second part, which is, or wherein we try to understand how then did this form of authority that we call legal rational authority, that is based on the language of law and that is based on technical rationality, how did it come to dominate in South Africa in post-1994? To summarize, this is where we were defeated. People did not know when they bought into this model of governance that actually white people were protecting their interests. It was ignorance. They did not realize that by signing into this model, white people were basically trying to protect their interests. It sounded lofty, just as it does to many people today, that when you say legal rational authority, due process, they think that it's an ideal thing. It was the same thing that happened to those people. So the material conditions matter under which people take decisions. I do not think that the Mandelas and everyone who was involved in this, if they had been fully conscious of this, they would have signed into it. Now let me tell you the subtext of the CODESA negotiations. Many of these things came to the political principles from what was called study groups. This is where people with technical expertise met and, charted legal principles, clauses of the Constitution. The NP, which basically was the other side of the ANC, at that point summoned its best brains into this study group. There was a whole group of the white Afrikaner professoriate that sat in these study groups who gave us these models. The ANC on the other side did not realize that it was being undone until very late. And at that point, they turned to India. And India supplied them with, the professoriate and people with technical expertise to try and match up, but it was too late in the negotiations. These are the material conditions. What I think is worth asking is that, what did we then do when the Mandelas had been led into this? What did we then, those of us who are alive now, what did we do? They made a mistake. What did we do to correct that mistake? So how did this model come to predominate post-1994 as the most favored model of governance? Put provocatively, my concern here is why than opt for a more expansive meaning of governance and authority, why did we settle for a more restricted, legalistic, and technical model of governance? Whose interests in society are best served or disavowed by this model? Because there are interests that are already excluded in this model. If it sounds abstract what this model is, think of a black student who comes to my office and say, but say, in class, I try to follow, but the English is too complicated. What am I supposed to say to that student and say, okay, we will compensate you over the white student? That's what the model does. That when I'm saying this model disavows certain interests, that student has no way. In fact, the university is going to say the student must enroll on an extended degree program for 4 years instead of 3 years. So the fault becomes that of the student. It's not the system. The system is all right. It's just you who's not able to cope with it. So, whose interests are already disavowed or excluded from this model? That's what. Now I'm going to try and explain to you how this model came to be dominant and then attend to the question of whose interests are already disavowed in this model. You see, the contemporary South African state, or the South African state post-1994, is nothing but a product of a compromise between two contending forces. On the one side, you had the dominant colonial racial minority represented by the Nationalist Party. On the other hand, and by the way, this dominant white racial minority that the Nationalist Party represented was dominant because it controlled the state. It controlled the apartheid state, but it also had the support of the Western world. So that was one side in these contending forces. On the other side, you had the dominated black indigenous majority represented by the ANC. If this other side was dominant because it had the state, but it also had the will, support of the Western world, this other side only had the people as its major resource. The ANC on this other side had the people as its resource. At that time, by the way, for those who didn't live through that time, the concept of the people had a different meaning. It was such a powerful concept that if you said the people, you really meant the people. So its only resource was the people. So it's not coincidental then that in this contest between these two contending forces, the dominant white minority basically spoke in the language of law. This other, the ANC, spoke in the language of society. See, there were two discourses that were at war in these negotiations. It was the discourse that fell back into the language of law. It was the discourse that fell back on the language of society. We need a new society. So you had the contest between the ANC and the Nationalist Party, but it was also a contest between the discourse of law and the discourse of society. More explicitly, it was a discourse of law that basically would result in legal rational authority. On this other side, this discourse of society would have led into a concept of a just and humane society. So of these two discourses, for the ANC, as I've said, the avowed interest was to build a new society. For the NP, the avowed interest was law and order. Everything must be done in accordance to law and order. So before you do anything, first you must say, does it pass the muster of law and order? Anything. We want to build we want to build a just and equitable society. Does it pass the muster of law and order? So these were the two discourses that were contending. And so it was a struggle. But as we've said, the product of that struggle was a compromise. The ANC did not defeat the Nationalist Party, just as the Nationalist Party did not vanquish the ANC. It was a compromise. And so in the compromise, because we can't behave as though the ANC had its way all through, it didn't have, because it didn't defeat the apartheid state, just as the apartheid state did not defeat it. So the compromise, in this compromise, the objective for the dominant white minority was, of course, to preserve the interests of this racial group. The white people who were now going to be outside of political power. So the primary object for the Nationalist Party was, how do you preserve white interest when you are outside of political power? So everything it did was to preserve this interest even though it was outside of political power. So this compromise that was reached basically was meant for the NP to preserve white interest even though they were outside of power. Now, if it is indeed a compromise, the ANC then could not have its way all through. There had to be a compromise. So, out of this compromise, then came basically a model of governance that is founded on law. So in that contest between the discourse of law and the discourse of society, the discourse of law won. To save time, let me summarize what that defeat of the idea of society by the idea of law meant. We all know in South Africa that black people were over time, over centuries, made by white people to be prone to socio-economic diseases. In the mines, our grandfathers and our fathers came back with silicosis, to die after working in the mines. Our people were made to live in inhospitable conditions and therefore contracted tuberculosis. All socio-economic diseases are basically as a result of what white people did to black people. The least we could do would have been to have a health system that is going to be able to address that. That is what the National Health Insurance basically aims to do. White people know fully well that they are responsible for many of the diseases that black people suffer. Now you may be saying that disease is an individual responsibility. It is not. Because you can avoid not to eat sunflower oil, poor people don't have that luxury. So when they have high cholesterol, it is not out of irresponsibility. They have no other option. You can use honey. They don't have that other option. They have to use the deadly white sugar that causes diabetes. And so many of the lifestyle diseases that black people suffer, it's not out of irresponsibility or because they could do anything about it. They can't. The children who die because they buy from the spaza shops is because, unlike your children who you can go buy, lunch packs for from Pick and Pay and whatnot, they have no option. On the way to school in the morning, they have to stop by in those spaza shops and they consume those things, they die. It's a structural position they are put in. My point is that then, if we recognize those things, national health insurance was basically, could be one of the things that we could all say, if we all contribute, would be addressing this historical past. Guess what? White people went to court, and a constitutional court with, I think it's all black judges now. With the majority of black people agreed with AfriForum that had gone to court to challenge the national health insurance. It's not legal, right? The questions of justice don't arise. Legal rational authority. And so white people had already known that their interests are preserved. They let us labor for all the, I think the national health insurance has been, being crafted for the past 10 years. They watched us for the past 10 years. They knew that at a critical point, they will go to court. And it doesn't matter that the judges are majority black, because the law, they know, the legal rational form of governance is on their side. So when I say that whose interests are best served by this legal rational authority and whose interests are disavowed, that's precisely what I mean. So in that compromise, as I've said, the language of law won. The language of society was defeated. So the present South African state, or South Africa post-1994, basically was and remains reflective of the compromise reached between these two contending forces. So the model of governance, this legal rational model, was itself a logical outcome of this compromise. And so when we blame, and I suspect we do have reasons to blame the ANC and to blame, the leadership that is in power. I bet you, if we took all those people and put all the people who are complaining, the results would be the same. There's a machinery that is at work here. The results would be the same. Because there's a machinery that is at work here. And that machinery is the machinery or the structure of legal rational authority. You perhaps might say, well, I wouldn't steal as much money. I suppose that's the only thing you might say. On another day, I will explain to you why you would end up actually, if not stealing, enabling that stealing. It's a simple thing. You see, for a white student at the University of Cape Town, finishing a 4-year degree, they can decide to be anything they want to be. In a politics class once I asked, and one white student said, no, I want to go into shipping. Why does he have the confidence that he can go into shipping? Because he knows that if he walked out of that university and walked into Rand Merchant Bank and said, can I see the manager? They are most likely going to say, did you have an appointment? He says, no. He might insist, and then the next moment the manager will appear, right? And the manager will listen. Go to you working now, go to any branch of a bank and say you want to see the manager. Talk less broaching such an idea to the manager. Would they have time for you? So which part of legal rational authority are you going to turn to? That's why I'm saying the results might have been the same, even if you put the best here. And why I think you would enable that kind of accumulation. See, corruption has a name in literature. It's called primitive accumulation. It's because for white people, they know that to accumulate, they can go to the market. So for that white student, he knows that if I go to the market will allow me accumulate. I can't say the same thing, that I can go to the market and I can accumulate. For black people, their market is the state. In order to accumulate, they have to turn to the state. They have nowhere else to go. And by the way, as much money gets stolen in the private sector as it gets stolen in the state. Even more, actually, in the private sector. So the point is that this primitive accumulation is itself as a result of the structure, because as black people, you can't assume that I'll go to the market and then, I'll accumulate and make money. No. White people, they know that's their avenue to accumulate. Where are black people likely to be listened to? It's in the state. And as a result, that kind of primitive accumulation, it's not because black people are corrupt. I ask any medical doctor, if you drew blood from black people, is there a gene responsible for corruption? No. It's a problem of socialization. So, it's not to say that it is right, but it is that the structure within which people, the objective material conditions within which people make decisions, compel them to. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make now is, we're in the second part, basically trying to explain why this model came to predominate. It's as a result of the compromise that was entered into. In this compromise, the language of law won over the language of society. Because in this compromise, I'm sure very few here would dispute the fact that the balance of forces in that contest between the ANC and the Nationalist Party, the balance of forces was in favor of the white settler minority in every regard. Even fewer would dispute the fact that in a number of issues up for resolution in those negotiations, the Nationalist Party or the nationalist movement, the ANC, was outmaneuvered. Now, I don't know whether you can blame people for being outmaneuvered. You can explain how people get outmaneuvered. I think the nationalist movement, the ANC, was outmaneuvered in many of those issues. And one of the issues in which it was thoroughly outmaneuvered, it's the question of education. And so not long ago, I think President Thabo Mbeki admitted as much that, they were outdone in the negotiations when it came into the structure of the education system in South Africa. So, it is my considered view that the model of governance is the one that is responsible for the crisis that we are in. And that model of governance is as a result of the compromise, out of that contest as I have outlined it. Now, what I want to do in the next few minutes is basically turn our attention to the question of what are the issues and concerns and interests that are from the beginning precluded from consideration when the prevailing logic of governance is that of legal rational authority. What are the interests that are from the beginning excluded when we work with legal rational authority? Now, let me summarize the answer to that with the simple point. If you have a standard model that standardizes procedure for all operations and decision making, That standard assumes that the people who come before you are all equal and possessed of the same capabilities. So if I'm going to use the same standard for everyone, I'm assuming that they all have the same capabilities. And they bring the same resources into that contest. Now, you don't need any lecturing to know that in everything in modern life, white people begin from a position of advantage. In everything. So how then do you keep saying that we must have the same rules for everyone? If someone is starting at the door there, 50 meters into a 100-meter race, you are starting at 0, the person is halfway through the race. So the interests of all those who start at 0 are already excluded from this model. Because you have a standardized procedure for everyone. And by the way, people are going to say, oh, but we do have laws that say that, black schools that are in quintile whatever should get more money than, that. First, why are you running away from the fact that it is black people? Why are you saying schools in quintile whatever? You see, once you say quintile, you are returning to the logic of statistics. It's black people. And then the question would be, why is it black people? Because once you say quintile, so then you don't ask, why are these people in quintile whatever? You just say it's schools in quintile whatever. If you say it's black people, you are going to ask, why is it black people? And then you have to go into the history of how black people end up here. When you go into that history, this is what you are going to find. And I'm going to use an example that is not in education. So white miners in South Africa at the start of mining in South Africa, diamonds 1867, gold 1886. From 1867, white miners were earning 50% more than black people, right? So it means that 1867, 1967 to 1994, that's about what, 200 years. Right? You are trying to equalize wealth between someone who's been earning 50 times more than you for 200 years. Economists are able, by the way, to calculate. Those of you who are economists here would be able to calculate today's value of that gap. Now, then when you have those laws, those BE and all those whatever laws, because they use the logic of legal rationality and statistics, they did not get into why is it black people and how did they get it. If they had asked that question, we would have explained to them. White people have been earning 50 times more than us for 200 years. Give us an equation then that is going to equalize that. That's all. But legal rational authority is not going to allow you to do that. Because, and by the way, people who speak in the language of legal rational authority do not come with angry faces into these meetings and say, no, you are not going to do this and that. No. They come in very expensive suits, well-dressed, expensive computers, laptops. They put up data for you on the screen and you are mesmerized by, those things. And you say that, oh, well, this is the most rational decision. They don't come angry saying that we want to keep you out. No. So that's why I'm saying let's be careful of thinking that it is the personalities that are there today. It is the model and how it operates. So I think you've already seen then which interests are best served by this model. It is a model that serves the dominant white settler minority. And these interests that get excluded from consideration are the interests of black people. So that I may edge closer then to finishing, I'm going to show you the mechanics through which this model preserves white interests and excludes black interests. You see, the model, to start with, this model, this technical legal model of technical legal rationality, which speaks in the language of law, shifts the locus of governance from the people to government functionaries or bureaucrats, whose sole claim to authority is basically the legally sanctioned, technical skills they have. Now, what do I mean? Sounds abstract. When you have a model of government that is basically technical and is based on legal rationality, and by the way, let's explain this concept, rationality. When someone says be rational, this is an extension into everyday life of the principle of economic rationality. Do a cost-benefit analysis. So what we are being basically called upon is that in our everyday lives, we must do a cost-benefit analysis. Is it worthwhile going there? Is it not? What would I gain in going there? Basically, our relationships as human beings become transactional. Because what would I benefit in going to that conference? If not, then I might as well. So we go to where our interests, because the cost-benefit analysis says that calculate what are your costs and what are your benefits. So rationality, when people say become rational, they basically say you must turn human relationships into, transactional relationships. They have a way of saying it, they say, but this is very wasteful, because they do a cost-benefit analysis. Now we want to fellowship with other black people. The cost and the benefit doesn't come to it. It just enables us to be together. And that on its own is enough. But you see, when you do rationality, cost-benefit analysis, you then depend on whether the costs do not outweigh the benefits. So the point I'm making is that the way in which it excludes certain interests and benefit others is because it shifts the locus of government governance from the people to basically the government functionaries. So rather than say, you are responsible for this district, for education in this district, let's go look at the schools. What is the quality of schools in this district and the experience of children? No, it's not. It's about show us the books. In fact, someone who might not even know where your district is, what it looks like, will tell you that you've achieved good governance. Because the shift is away from the people, but to the functionaries themselves. The second way in which this legal rational authority excludes people is because of its over-reliance on statistical or empirical evidence. Now, it's simple. Statistical and empirical evidence exist where there is a plan, where you plan for people. Mjondolo, you can't generate statistical evidence. In anything informal, you can't generate statistical evidence. You can extrapolate at best, which is an assumption. For white people, their lives are planned to the T. You have statistics for everything for them. Basically down to the number of how many times they go to the supermarket. It's easy because they always have the money, right? And so they're unlike you, where I buy sugar today because I don't have money. When I find money, I'll go buy something else. White people go once, they buy everything, and every other time it's for leisure. So you have statistics basically for everything for white lives because it's planned. Our lives do not have statistics as black people. And so we are already disadvantaged. Now, empirical evidence is not just statistics. I would give you an example. You know, you find an odd thing if you work with white people at UCT. White students, you have a test, white students come, the student is Melissa Stein or whatever, and they bring you a medical note. The note is by Dr. Stein. You have to think, the black student has to think, by the way, where am I going? In fact, they must have money to go to the doctor. This one got it at home. Or down the road, it's, it's the brothers, it's, this one they get it. Who's at an advantage? Evidence. So when people bring you evidence, the evidence is like law, it doesn't mean justice. Because there are people who are able to generate evidence better than others, whose lives are structured in such a way that they leave traces. Till now we live and die without leaving traces as black people. So this veneration of evidence is itself exclusionary. What this evidence also does is that it does well to hide the realities or the inequalities behind the numbers. You know, there's a language of skill in South Africa today. There's a shortage of skill, and all things that go around that language of skill. So we know that the South African economy it expanded post-1994, but contracted again post-2008 crisis, financial crisis. And we know that the manufacturing sector basically has been shrinking. So the South African economy is not bigger now than it was when it, pre-1994. We never had apartheid regime saying that it needed to import skills. Right? If it needed skill, it manufactured it here. But the same white people today come and say that we must import skill. And so suddenly you don't see the race and racism in it because the language is the language of skill. We have a shortage of engineers and whatnot. How were you able, under apartheid, to produce the engineers and you didn't have to import them? All of a sudden today, skill has to be imported. See, the technical language that is used, that we all fall into, is actually meant to preserve certain interests. That's why you must be wary of criticizing those who are in power, because tomorrow you yourself might have agreed that there is a shortage of skills. And you might have agreed when people said, let's import that skill. You might not have said, wait a moment, how come? The last point about how this technical language of legal rational authority basically excludes other people is that the categories it creates do not admit of ethical issues that are thrown up by the relations of white dominance and black domination. So these categories, like category of skill, if you were to disaggregate the mortality or life expectancy in South Africa today by racial terms, white people live longer. It's not genetic. It's as a result of the structure of life. Generally, life expectancy for men in South Africa is 69. For women, it's about 71 or so. For white people, +8 in both categories. Is it because they are genetically stronger? So, what I'm trying to say is that the scientific categories that legal rational authority creates, they hide the unethical relations of white dominance and black domination. You get enamored with these statistics, you don't see what they are hiding behind. And this is the model of legal rational authority. Last part, which is basically, let us assess then the adequacy of this model when measured against the problems or the challenges of post-colonial South Africa. You see, because of this model's over-reliance solely on the language of law, what it has done is that it has elided or basically papered over critical questions that are central to the idea of society. This over-reliance on the language of law basically papers over critical questions that are central to the idea of society. And one of such ideas that are central or key to society is the language, or it's the issue of public morality. Now, what do we mean by public morality? In order to get a sense of its importance, we must know that law does not build a society. Law regulates society. Law does not build a society, it regulates society. So something else must build a society. And that's public morality. Amen. So when you elevate law over public morality, you end up with the crisis we're in South Africa. You think you are regulating a society, but you don't have a society. So you are regulating what you don't have. Because we must first agree on the ethical values that are going to govern our everyday relations as human beings, even when the law is not looking in that direction. Once we've agreed on those, we may then ask law to regulate for the sake of those who fail to observe those ethical relations or those principles that govern our everyday relations. But what we have done, we've done the reverse. The law must always tell us what are the ethical relations of relating to each other. You see, if you live here and then your neighbor sells drugs, as a community you can't go to the neighbor and say, but you see what we are doing is wrong. You have to wait for law enforcement. Because the language of law, you can't speak to this person in the language of public morality. You only can speak to this person in the language of law. The person might as well tell you, go report to the police, don't come to my house again. And you would have nothing else to say. In fact, the person would stand at the gate, don't get near my house, go report to the police. Because you have a society that assumes it's a society and regulates its everyday relations with law, everything now has to defer to law. In a community, someone starts a shebeen right next to a school, the community and the principal can't do anything. Because the person says, I've gone to the liquor board and the liquor board gave me a license. You can't, as the community, say, but can't you see that your actions are destructive to the notion of society or community? So what we suffered as a result of the elevation of the language of law or of legal rational authority was that the idea of public morality died. Those of us who were involved in the struggle, if there was an assumption that you had taken money from the movement, we did not need legal proof for it. We had a name for you, Umdlwembe. It didn't depend on law. And it was the worst thing that we could do to you is to be called Umdlwembe, because everywhere you went, you left KZN and you went to the Eastern Cape and they asked comrades in KZN about you. You say, Umdlwembe lo. You were ostracized everywhere because we had a language for it. We had revolutionary morality for it. Now, the equivalent of that in society would have been public morality. We don't have. Thieves walk high because we don't have a language of ostracizing them. And that language would have come from public morality. In fact, there's an odd thing these days. You know, thieves go to court of law wearing expensive suits, you know, and it's basically a contest of, you know, see me. There's no sense of shame because we don't have a language of public morality. I may leave you with a very sad truth about the tolerance to that kind of behavior. So I teach in a university and I teach a compulsory course, research methods to postgrad students, a difficult course. Students generally struggle with it. And I say to people, I say this to traffic officers when they want a bribe. I say, see, when you think what you're doing is right, tomorrow, if your daughter is in my class and your daughter fails my course and I demand to sleep with her in order to pass her, you would have no language with which to speak to me because that's the same thing you are doing. Often we don't see the cycle of life. People are very myopic. They look at, oh no, if I steal money now, you know, there's more money in my pocket. What we are doing is that we are generalizing an ethic that becomes acceptable. So as long as I'm not caught out in the act, you would also have no language with which to speak to me. And I would have vandalized your daughter for life. You see, if you take my money, you know, I might make more money tomorrow. If I sleep with your daughter against her will and she's a virgin, there's nothing else she can do for life. It's a plot in her life that will remain forever. And I can easily do it because people are desperate to pass. So you see, there is a very myopic way of thinking about things in a legal language because people have money to wear suits, you know, to go to court and hire expensive lawyers. They think that law is the final arbiter of truth. They would know the day that happens to their daughter, and by the way, in many other universities it happens. And so, my point is that, as I conclude, my point is that building a society requires public morality. Law is not enough. What will hold me if we became this legalistic society? So what should restrain me from sleeping with all the girls that I teach? The law would not be there. But public morality ought to do so. And that's why we must despise this model of governance that elevates law above the notion or the idea of society and above the idea of public morality. I thank you very much.
Singahlala phansi banqela. Sizosijwayela bangcwele singathuki. So jwayela ukulalela nje. Ungalalela amavesi so. Kona siyakhale lapha libuyesume yabona. Bathi ke sizojwayela bangcwele. Kona isizini esikuyona uNkulunkulu is stretching us. Amen. And sizimisela ukufunda. Sizimisela ukwenza njani bangcwele? Uyabona nje na ukuthi iyakuhlakaniphisa indaba yokulalela inkulumo enje. Ngisho ungayizwanga yonke kodwa kukhona. Khona la uzovela khona ujikjela uhlehla uthi. Hallelujah. Wow, bazalwane, this is beautiful. Yeah, this is beautiful. And si intentional ukuthi ibandla lika Jesu silibhabhadise kulamanzi. Si intentional. Yeah, ukuthi silibhabhadise in this body of knowledge. Scripture bazalwane is a body of knowledge. uNkulunkulu outdesignele i-redemption. Akasho uNkulunkulu ukuthi that is the only body of knowledge available. Nizwile bangcwele? iScripture uNkulunkulu uhlanganise ukuthi kube possible sazi ukuthi i-redemption yenzeke kanjani. Akufuneki manje senze sengathi iBhayibheli yonke ufuna ibe khona kuphela. Nizwile bangcwele? Angifuni ke ningizwe ngenye indlela. Angifuni. Umbhalo bazalwane is a foundation of life. Sizwe sithini? Yeah, mangikhuluma about redemption ngikhuluma ngento eserious angifuni ungicabanga ukuthi khona la ngolimita khona umbhalo. No. Nayi governance sifuna ukuthi ibuyele khona. Yeah, ukuzophuza kulomthombo. Nizithi ngitheni? We are also redeeming governments. Nizithi sitheni? Because we are setting up these sessions so that there might be redemption in the public square. Are we following this, Bangwell? We are taking redemption into the public square. Amen. So nginkonto usuyayizwa ke manje usuyabona no. Benga uqitha umbhalo nange buyela kuwona. Eve kunzima ukulalelwa igwala. Ehlala njalo umbhalo lucabangela ukuthi ungabulawa umbhalo kade wabakhona ngeke udefend wena. Umbhalo hayi. Umbhalo ukwazi ukuzidefenda wona. Ulotshwe kanjalo. Amen. Sizoya kodla bangcwele. Sizoya kuphi? Benginithembisa ukuthi kukhona ukudla. Azameni siyodla. Lithini ixesha